Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternities video where I name my favorite movie of each year that I was alive. So in this video I will go by every year since the year I was born and name my favorite movie of every year. Pretty straightforward. It may seem kind of out of the blue as to what I usually do on my channel. I used to do a lot of movie type stuff when my channel first started, and I guess I got a bit nostalgia for that. But more to the point, I recently watched a video of another popular YouTuber who did the same thing, where he went through every year that he was alive and lists his favorite movie, or for him it was like the most influential movie of each year. And boy howdy did I ever disagree with his list. And so watching his video is like, I should do my own video with this. I want to do it the correct way and actually show the correct best movie of each year. But, you know, I'm not saying the best movie of each year. I'm saying my favorite movie of each year. So I am sort of making this personal about my experience, and it's just my opinion. Unlike that other video where it was not necessarily his favorite movie of each year, but the most influential, for me, it's kind of like the most influential is my favorite. So it's kind of one and the same for me. So I would say that it is, in my opinion, the best movie of the year. But it's more accurate to say it's my personal favorite of each year, and it's also the one that had the biggest impact of my life. Now, I found making this list a bit difficult because there were certain years, particularly the mid to late 90s, where there was all my favorite movies, a lot of my favorite movies growing up all came out in this era, so it's hard to narrow it down to just one movie each year. But then there's other years where it was struggling to find even one movie that I could call my favorite, particularly the mid to late aughts or 2000s, because I think that was I think overall the 2000s was kind of a dark time for art, movies, television, music, especially music. Actually, I hate the music of the 2000s, like the freaking Slipknot and whatever, all that garbage, Eminem. Anyway, and it was hard for me. Some years of the 2010s, probably the early 2010s, no, more like the mid 2010s, it was a bit difficult. It was sort of scattered throughout. The late 2010s is when I was doing my channel, so I just went back and watched my top 10 movies. But I didn't do one for 2020 or 2021, the year of the pandemic, and I found those 2 years very hard to come up with something because the pandemic made movies, scarce and far between, which is probably why I didn't do top 10s during those 2 years. But anyway, and there's a thing I used to do. When I guess I was in my 20s, maybe, where one year I made a list of every year I was born, the movie that won the Oscar, the highest grossing movie, and my favorite movie of the year, and I watched all three movies of each year. It's it was a fun little exercise. Now, I did a video already about the Oscars and every movie that won since I was born, and also what I would have picked. I'm not going to do one about highest grossing because those were by far the worst movies. It was mostly crap. But hey, I thought, why don't I do one about my personal favorite of each year? So, let's go ahead and get this thing started, and I'll start, of course, with the year I was born, in 1979. Yes, I'm giving away my age. Anyway, so 1979 was actually a hard year to come up with. There wasn't really a movie that I loved. It came down to, I was trying to remember the third movie, but it came down to either Star Trek the Motion Picture, but that's just because it's Star Trek. I don't actually like that movie. Anyone who saw my review on it could see that, I actually think it's really boring, and a lot of people were like acting now like hipsters, saying that's really, artistic or whatever. I think had a troubled production, and it's a slow, boring movie that's paced really, really badly. So I don't like it. So I couldn't pick that as my favorite movie of the year. I thought maybe the one that won the Oscar, Kramer versus Kramer, but that's kind of just okay. I've never been a huge fan of Apocalypse Now. I will say that. I saw it once, like when I was in my 20s, and I thought, it's alright. I don't really see the big deal out of it. And then there's Superman 2. I kind of liked Superman 2. I almost went with this because I liked this when I was a kid growing up, but I watched this as an adult and it was kind of a bit silly. I mean, it was okay. So I almost went with this, but ultimately I decided to go with Alien as my favorite movie of 1979. Even though Alien's not one of my favorite movies of all time. I don't think it's as good as the sequel, but I'll talk about that a bit later. I honestly think it's a bit overrated. I'm not a huge fan of Ridley Scott. Although I often say that Alien is my one exception to Ridley Scott's. I usually don't like Ridley Scott's films, but I liked Alien. It was okay. Probably more influential or more impactful to me than Superman 2. So, okay, I'll go with Alien for 1979. So then we get into 1980, no-brainer, Star Wars Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back. I think one of the best movies of all time, and I talked about this in my Star Wars reviews, that I think this is the only great Star Wars film. That all the other Star Wars films are good, decent, to varying degrees, or terrible. And this is the only one that's, I would say, is actually truly great. I think it's, Empire Strikes Back. What can I say about it? It's a classic. It has this, it just gets the formula so perfect, like with Yoda and Darth Vader going around choking people, force choking people, and the romance between Leia and Han, which wasn't written the best. The dialogue's not the best, but it's not as bad as Attack of the Clones. And the Cloud City, like, it's just, the whole movie just flows as a masterpiece, and maybe I do have a bit of nostalgia for it, but I put my nostalgia aside for the Star Wars movies, and I actually realized that Return of the Jedi and A New Hope aren't as good as my nostalgia, and I think many people's nostalgia calls it to be, but Empire Strikes Back is. Okay, so that's my pick for 1980. So next we move to 1981. Okay, now this might seem like a cop-out, but I chose nothing. Because I could not come up with a single goddamn movie from 1981 that I really liked. And I will say up front, this is the only year I do that for. There's some years I was close to doing that for, but I was like, no, let's get this movie. 1981. There's really, and when I did my list, I was telling you about when I was in my 20s, what I chose was Excalibur because I couldn't come up with anything, so I watched Excalibur, and I'm like, this movie's actually not good. It had been a long time since I've seen it. I was like, I'll just choose that one. Patrick Stewart was in it. And I watched it, and I was like, this is kind of dumb. I don't really like this. Now, I know what many of you are probably, those of you who are aware this movie came out in 1981, probably screaming, Raiders of the Lost Ark. Come on, Mark, Raiders of the Lost Ark. Well, I don't like that movie. I'm sorry. I don't like Raiders of the Lost Ark. I've never been a big Indiana Jones fan. In fact, the only Indiana Jones movie I actually like is The Last Crusade. And I don't think that one's amazing either, but it's the only one I like. I don't know. A lot of people hate me for this. I know my siblings give me shit about this, but I don't know. I was just never into it as a kid for whatever reason. And so when I watched this as an adult to try to give it a chance, I just found a silly, pulpy, by the numbers action film about where the hero is a robber who steals artifacts and robs cultures of their heritage. Honestly, so I never been one for Raiders of the Lost Ark. I'm sorry about that, but that's just how it is. And then Escape from New York is okay, I guess, but it's not good enough for me to call it my favorite movie. I never liked Porky's. I hate the Time Bandits. I'm just not into that kind of. There is a movie by what's the director, Terry Gilliam, that is that actually is my favorite movie of all time, which I'll get to later on this list. But I think this more had to do with the writers of that film, whereas I just never been a huge Terry Gilliam. I think his style's too weird. I don't know. That's just me. So anyway, I was gonna cop out and say my pick for 1981 was Airplane. Even though that movie actually didn't come out in 1981, it came out in 1980. But of course, I had to pick Empire Strikes Back over it. But Airplane is my favorite comedy of all time. I think I've recently come to that realization. I think it's my favorite comedy of all time. Yes, watching it now, some of the jokes don't date so well and come off as a bit racist. But overall, I just think it's just a masterpiece when it comes to comedy. It's the standard of comedy. But it didn't actually come out in 1981, but fuck it. Anyway, let's get to 1982, which is another no-brainer, Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, obviously. I saw this movie repeatedly over and 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 over again when I was like 11, 12, so like a decade after it came out. But I was obsessed with this movie. This is the movie that made me a Trekkie. It's what got me into Star Trek. I hated Star Trek before I saw this movie, and for some reason, my sister, decided to watch this movie, and for some reason I decided to give it a chance, and I fell in love with it, and it started my whole love from Star Trek came from this movie, which I think is one of the best movies ever made. So next we'll get into 1983, which is going to be Star Wars Episode 6, Return of the Jedi. Yes, I never promised not to revisit a franchise and keep that in mind for the future. And I did mention Return of the Jedi is not as good as I remember it being, but it's still the best movie that came out in 1983. I couldn't really come up with anything better than this. It's still a Star Wars movie. It's still a classic. It's got freaking the Luke confronting his father, Vader, and turning him good. That was probably the most powerful story of the entire trilogy. It's just the rest of the stuff in the movie, like, it doesn't have cohesion with the Jabba stuff at the start, and then of course Ewoks are there to sell toys. So it's not a great movie. And there's a lot of issues that I could nitpick, and I did in my review. But it's still good, still great, still love it. So next is 1984. Which I'm actually going to say Starman. I've mentioned this once or twice on my channel, not very often. Most people hadn't really heard of this or forgot about it. It is a John Carpenter movie with Jeff Bridges and Karen Allen. Karen Allen was in Raiders of the Lost Ark, aforementioned, and Scrooged. I watched Scrooged over the holidays, just like my sister did. Anyway, I was in love with Karen Allen. As a kid, she was my crush, and mainly because of this movie. And it was a wholesome crush. There was nothing dirty about it, just saying. And I think this is probably, now I'm a bit of a sci-fi geek by saying this, but I think this is the best romance movie of all time, personally. And again, that's a sci-fi geek's perspective. This movie made me cry several times. I think it is a pure love story, even though like Karen Allen's character doesn't actually love the alien, but it's more of the alien took the image of her deceased husband and sort of gave her that last chance to have a kid with her husband. It's a bit of a spoiler there, but it was so touching. And it was just a good sci-fi. And to be honest, I typically don't like John Carpenter. I'm not a huge fan of The Thing, and most of his horror, I think, are bad. Or Halloween, by the way, and not a fan of that either. And so this is really the only John Carpenter film I like. So for me, it's easily his best. And I think it's a really overlooked one. Anyway, 1985 is gotta be Back to the Future, of course. Everyone's gonna say Back to the Future. There's really nothing better that came out in 1985 anyway. And when I think 1985, of course, whenever that year comes up, I think Back to the Future because they always mention how we gotta get back to 1985. And it's a hilarious movie that holds up to today. It's what it's actually about is kind of creepy. About someone's mom like having a crush on them and trying to get with them. Of course, she's not aware that's her kid because he's from the future, but still, it's kind of a messed up storyline. Yet they turned it into a family film classic. That's impressive. So, and yeah, I do love me some Back to the Future. So, we'll get into 1986, which is easily Aliens. Which unlike Alien, I do fucking love this movie. It is in my top 5 favorite movies of all time. I think this movie is a pure masterpiece. It's the best action movie ever made. It's the best horror movie ever made. It's the best suspense movie ever made. Some people argue with me when I say it's the best horror movie. It's not really horror. It's more of an action. I'm like, I correct them. My friend, it's an action horror. So horror is a part of that. And it's definitely a horror film because it's got that typical trope horror, which I usually hate, where it starts out with a larger group of characters and throughout the film they all start dying off until you get to the end where there's only one or two. I mean, all horror movies do that, or most of them, and usually I hate that trope, but this is the only movie I'm able to forgive for that trope because they make it work. I mean, it's just the way they plot Ripley's character throughout and how they hone on her sort of mother instincts. I once listened to a lecture where they broke down this is exactly how this film was a masterpiece, and that lecture just got me to believe even more how much this movie is amazing. But the one thing I did disagree with the lecturer about is that he said that the theatrical cut was the pure version much better than the extended version, which I think is bullshit. Actually, when I saw the extended version, I loved it even more, and I'm like, why the fuck did they delete these scenes? These scenes make the movie so much better. So I would argue with anyone watching Aliens to watch the director's cut, especially if you haven't seen the director's cut yet. It's so much better. It adds so much to the film, in my opinion. It's a pure masterpiece. It's a masterpiece. Anyway, we'll get into 1987, which is Predator. So, Alien versus Predator, came that sort of thing. And to be fair, I don't like Predator as nearly as much, nowhere near as much as I do Aliens. In fact, and I've been vocal about this on my channel, I actually prefer Predator 2 to Predator. But there was another movie that beat out Predator 2, so that's not on my list for the year it came out. But 1987, there was nothing better than Predator, which I still do like Predator. It's maybe a bit too much testosterone for my taste, but it's still a great action horror suspense film with Arnie, going, "Come on, do it, kill me, I'm here," and it is still a great movie to watch. So yeah, I'll go for Predator for 1987. 1988, I'll have to say The Naked Gun. I used to say this is my favorite comedy of all time, but, recently I realized it's actually Airplane, which was the precursor to this, and this isn't quite as good as Airplane, but it's still good. It's still hilarious, the Frank Drebin and all the jokes that entail, and the whole baseball sequence where he was, singing the national anthem badly. It's a classic. It's hilarious. One of my favorite comedies. Anyway, next we'll get into 1989, which I'm surprised I actually went with Back to the Future Part 2. And it was funny because when I was first making this list, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm going to do Back to the Future, but probably not. Back to the Future Part 2 is not going to make it. But I couldn't come up with anything better for 1989. Batman, maybe, but no, actually, I liked, Michael Keaton's Batman was okay. But really, I was never that huge into it, even though I thought I was. But Back to the Future Part 2, I used to watch repeatedly, like the whole Back to the Future trilogy, I would watch repeatedly as a kid. But 2 was always my favorite, even though the first one objectively is better written, it's tighter, it's got better humor, it just flows better. Back to the Future Part 2 is what first introduced me to the concept of a time paradox or alternate timelines and stuff like that, which is something where the first Back to the Future is kind of just straightforward. He's in the 50s trying to not get his mom to want to bang him. But Back to the Future Part 2, there's an alternate timeline. The timeline's been changed. He has to go back and fix it and change it. And so this is what really got, and probably it doesn't hold up to other movies and shows that deal with this subject matter, but it was the one that first introduced it to me. So yeah, it was always been my personal favorite. Next, we'll get into 1990, the movie that beat out Predator 2, which was hard to do, but I had to give it to Total Recall. I still love this movie. My sister covered this on her Nostalgia Lane, I think a year ago, around that, and for her it didn't quite hold up and she wasn't as impressed with it. I still am. I've seen this movie recently several times and I still love it. I still think, there's a lot of gratuitous violence in it for sure, but it's a 1990s Arnold action film. What do you want? Gratuitous violence, of course, is part of what you're signing up for watching an Arnie 90s action movie. And sometimes it does bother me, to be fair, but I still think the mind-bendy, twisty plot is amazing, and it probably won. I just such a huge fan of the mind-bendy, twisty thing, and this is probably the movie that first got me into it growing up. So again, talking about most influential, and it still sticks with me for that. And plus, it introduced me to Ronnie Cox, who would portray the terrible Captain Jellicoe later on. Anyway, I still love this movie. I still think it's great. So anyway, 1991 is going to be The Naked Gun, 2.5, The Smell of Fear. Yes, I know I'm doing a lot of sequels and it's more than once going and revisiting the franchise. But I always like 2.5 better than 1. And, I could go with The Undiscovered Country for this, but honestly, I don't think I like The Undiscovered Country as much as a lot of Star Trek fans do. Don't get me wrong, I still like it. I still think it's a great Star Trek movie, but Naked Gun 2.5 is one of the best comedies of all time. And as I said, I like it better than the first one. And it's just the jokes just keep hitting throughout the entire film, where I think the first one, it kind of lulls at parts where it's you're waiting for the next joke, but here it's just relentless, non-stop, telling hilarious jokes, which I'm not going to recite. But anyway, that's my pick for 1991. 1992 is going to be Reservoir Dogs, which I didn't see this until several years after because no one really heard of it when it first came out. And then this is another one. When I was a teenager, I would watch this repeatedly over and over again. And I think to this day, it remains my favorite Quentin Tarantino film. It's kind of tied with Pulp Fiction, but Pulp Fiction won't make my list because 94 was a crowded year. So I gotta give Quentin Tarantino some love here. With my tie for his favorite movie, Reservoir Dogs, which I just think it's a classic, the way that they play with linear time and they tell the movie. The whole movie is about a heist that you actually never see, which is kind of ingenious for a low budget film to do, where they film around the heist, but it's still even more interesting. You don't even need to see the heist because it's all about people, this group being paranoid about an undercover cop being in their midst, which actually turns out to be true. And just the way they disseminate this information, I think, is fucking brilliant. Of course, the dialogue, Quentin Tarantino is a master of that. So, yeah, definitely my pick for 92. Next, we'll get into 1993, which is Falling Down. I absolutely love this movie. Okay, so I gotta tell this story. Something my sister knows, that it was a running joke because my siblings would have these parties and I'd meet a lot of their friends, hang out and get stoned and drink with them a lot. And there's one guy in particular. So there's one night I got really drunk off my ass, and I asked him if he's seen Falling Down because I thought it was a great movie, and he's like, yes, I've seen it. But then I kept asking him that same question over and over again because I was so drunk. He was like, yes, I've seen Falling Down. And then it became a running joke where every time I saw him, I would be like, hey, have you seen Falling Down? And then he started doing it to me. He was like, hey, have you seen Falling Down? And then I recently, like a couple years ago, reconnected with him on Facebook, and the first thing I asked after like 20 years of not talking to him was like, hey, have you seen Falling Down? And then he like would post this stuff on my wall being like, Falling Down, have you seen this? So it's still a running joke to this day. But anyway, it doesn't really have anything to do with the movie except for how, I guess, influential it was for me and how. But the movie itself, I actually think was a brilliant commentary on just how failed, modern day, especially American capitalism is, and how it sort of leaves people behind and can disenfranchise people. And it's funny because the protagonist is kind of like, he's an anti-hero because he's an insane person who wants to kill his wife, but they actually get you to sort of sympathize with him as being the victim of society rather than seeing him as, someone who is just a psychopath himself. He still has to go down, and we still follow the cop who takes him down, but you actually feel some sympathy for him, even though you know that he had to be taken down. But you see just how destructive this whole society was, and not just towards him, but the other people who have been affected by it as well. Pretty damn good movie. Yeah, absolutely love it. So next we'll get into 1994. As I said, a very crowded year. I thought I was going to go for The Shawshank Redemption because that is one of my favorite movies of all time. And some people might hate me. I kind of hate myself, but I'm not going to. And again, Pulp Fiction, another really, really close one. But I'm actually going to go for Leon the Professional. God, it's a tough one between this but I'd see Leon the Professional for me was just more, I have more of a personal attachment to it. And this is another example of a movie where the director's cut made it so much better. Like, I didn't think because I always liked this movie growing up, but it wasn't until I saw the director's cut, or actually it's not the director's cut, it's the extended version, because the director specifically said he prefers the theatrical version, which I think he's wrong. So it's the extended version is a better way to say it, where there's the scenes they left out I thought were crucial to the movie, and in fact super enhanced it and really enhanced my understanding and my emotional involvement with the film. We get the young Natalie Portman when she's like 12 or 11 years old, who sort of ends up with a hitman, an assassin, ends up living with him, and she has like a crush on him, but of course she's not down to being with an 11-year-old because he's not a creep, but he cares about her in his own way and wants to look after her, and eventually, dies getting the revenge that she wanted for, the people who killed her family. It's just one of the most emotionally powerful action movies ever. It's so powerful, and yeah, the extended version makes it so much better. So anyway, 1995, another credit year, credit house. I'm actually going to go with 7. This movie really hit me when I first saw it. It was marketed as a standard Hollywood film, but and so you go see it, you think you're saying, oh, this is another, buddy cop action film with Brad Pitt and Morgan Freeman. But it's not. It's a lot more realistic, mundane, and dark and twisted. And the ending, of course, this ending has been immortalized through the memes, whatever. And some people try to make fun of it, saying it's a stupid ending or silly ending, and it's a funny ending because it's dumb. I'm like, get the fuck out of here. The ending was absolutely mind blowing because this is I didn't realize like movies could actually do this, where it's not a happy ending. It's a dark, fucked up, twisted ending where essentially the villain wins. But the point, like, moralizes and tells a story just about how fucked up society has become and that's more of the point of the movie rather than the good guys catching the bad guy, because that actually doesn't happen. He essentially, he gives himself up, and his master plan plays out exactly how he wanted it to. It's a fucked up film in the best possible way. So this one always stuck with me. And then, 95 also had Braveheart, which I don't care how historically inaccurate it is. I always loved it. Always been one of my favorites. But anyway, move over to 1996, 12 Monkeys. Favorite movie of all time. I'm still saying that. It's definitely had the biggest impact on me. I saw it 6 times in the theaters when this came out. So this is a Terry Gilliam film I was referring to earlier because he directed this. He had this weird Terry Gilliam's in there, which I'm not the biggest fan of, but it didn't interfere with how amazing this movie is. And to be fair, sometimes it does enhance it. Sometimes the strange way he films and his weird shit actually does enhance the story. But I didn't even notice that when I first saw it. When I first saw it, it's the mind-bending, twisty thing done to the extreme, to its best ability, I think. And it is based off of a French short film from, I can't remember which decade, but much earlier. And I did eventually see that short film, and then of course I had to, at film school, and all these pretentious film school students there thought it was way better than 12 Monkeys, but it's different. Like, you can't really compare the two. And plus, I think there are people who thought it was better, kind of pretentious because it's in French and it's all photographic, whatever. But anyway, but regardless, that it wasn't a great story to base a film off, and I think the reason why I think 12 Monkeys is better is because it goes beyond that. It gets into the nature of reality, the nature of sanity. It really plays with the fact of what does it mean to be sane or insane, and when it throws in like fantastical things like time travel. That's why I think it's beyond, and that's why. And the ending is like so superbly depressing, but also at the same time, it's like what meant to happen. It's the best example of type 1 time travel. That is, whatever happened, you can't change it. I think it's a classic. It's the best pure example of that, done for amazing storytelling. So if you haven't seen this movie, god damn it, go and watch it. It's amazing. 96 also had Mother Night, one of my favorite movies, but no one's heard of that really. But that was a great movie too. IMDb has this list as a 1995 movie, but I was there. It came out in January of 96. Maybe it's referring to, IMDb always goes by festivals or pre-releases, bullshit like that. Fuck that. So I defied IMDb and put it in 1996 because it came out and the wide public release was in January of 96. I remember seeing this in a snowstorm. And it takes place in 96 too. So anyway, 1997 is going to be Lost Highway. I'm not a huge David Lynch fan. And whenever I bring up Lost Highway, it says it's one of my favorite movies. People are like, "Oh, so you're a huge David Lynch fan?" I'm like, "No, I'm a Lost Highway fan." I kind of like some of his other movies, but some of his other earlier stuff, like Blue Velvet, I just never got into. Mulholland Drive, which is often, undeservedly gets all the praise over this one, which I think Lost Highway is way better. But I did like Mulholland Drive too, but Lost Highway was just better. I never got into his later stuff either. So it's not, I'm not a David Lynch fan as much as I'm a Lost Highway fan. I loved this movie when I first saw it. I came out of the theater, I was like, what the fuck? What is this? What did I just watch? This makes no sense. But then after watching it, and at first I didn't even know if I liked it, but then watching it repeatedly again and again, I started to like it more and more. And then eventually once the internet became more of a thing, I, went online and read all these things about what it's actually about, and then went back and analyzed it and saw how everything is very sort of artistic, and does have a particular story. And I did do a video where I broke down exactly what it's about. So it is specifically about something. It's actually an O.J. Simpson analogy, which I didn't think of that, because when I think of O.J. Simpson, I think of kind of the circus that was the trial. So I think of it as kind of a silly comedic thing, but in real life, he murdered someone. And he tries, in his mind, he acts like he didn't. Or he was the victim, but he was actually the murderer, and that's what the movie focuses on. It focuses on the really dark, fucked up aspect of that. And of course, Highway, I should have got O.J. Simpson on that, because it's famous for his chasing on the highway, which they reference in this movie. But yeah, it's really dark, really art, and I love the soundtrack. I think this movie has the best use of soundtrack, and it really inspired me when I was doing short films and whatnot, that brief period in my life. And some people were like, oh, you can't do it to music. But then I found out that David Lynch would blast music as he was filming this. He would blast like Nine Inch Nails. I fucking love Nine Inch Nails. And he'd blast Nine Inch Nails while he was filming this. And I was like, and it kind of tells, because it has that musical feeling to it, not in the way it just feels like a dumb music video, but in the way it feels highly artistic, the way he uses music intercut. Even though I'm not a huge fan of all the bands that are in this, like I don't really like Marilyn Manson anymore. I never liked Rammstein, but it works so well in this film. And of course, it's got one of my favorite Smashing Pumpkins songs of all time is in this. So yeah. I just love this movie. 1998 is going to be Dark City. 98 was a tough year. I was thinking of The Truman Show, or The Big Lebowski. God, what a classic that is. But I actually had to go with Dark City. I actually think this is better than The Matrix. And I compare it because it has that same pull the wool over your eyes. The world of reality is not what you think it is. And this actually came out a year before. And so by the time I saw The Matrix, I was like, oh, it's just doing what Dark City already did, but not as good. Sorry. I mean, it doesn't have all the cool flying action sequences, but I was never really that into that thing. So it wasn't really my thing. And Dark City, acting's not the best, to be honest, but I didn't really care, because I had no idea what I was getting into. And I love how the promotional materials was very vague to what the fuck was actually going on. It's just like this dark city where this guy is framed for a murder he didn't commit, and it seems kind of generic, but there, of course, is a much greater, bigger sci-fi theme behind it, which I'm not going to give away in case you haven't seen it. It's because I don't want to spoil it for you, because fucking good. And it becomes this really highly stylized sci-fi film that I think is one of the best ever made, personally. I heard a while ago they were going to make a show about this, a couple years ago. I don't know if that's still in the works or not. Maybe not. I'd be very iffy about it. Oh, they did make that 12 Monkeys show, which I absolutely refuse to watch. That's the only time they rebooted or remade something where I outright, like, I started watching it and I felt so fucked up inside. I was like, they can't make this into a sci-fi action show. This is a masterpiece. But I wouldn't feel that way with Dark City. I would give it a shot, see how they go. Anyway, 1999 is Fight Club. Of course. 99's, yeah, another strong year for films, but I had to go with Fight Club. This was the first year I went to New Zealand, and I remember seeing this movie in New Zealand, and it was that was it's the year I got married. It was an influential year of my life, where everything was changing, and seeing Fight Club was a part of that because again, this movie was unique. I hadn't really seen anything about it. Yes, it's a satire. I get that it's a satire, but anyone who says it's not anti-capitalist is missing the point of the fucking movie. I've heard people argue with me, oh, if you think it's anti-capitalist and you're missing the point. No, you're missing the point. I know it's a fucking satire. I know that they're not praising Tyler Durden and saying that these people are in the right, but it's talking about how fucked up all society is, and it leads to these fucked up people that we follow, and the fucked up protagonist who's living two separate lives. Oh, sorry, I spoiled it, but you should know this by now. But anyway, it is a satire, and it's a great satire, and it's so fucking good. It's just blew my mind when I saw it, especially that ending. It's like my mind almost exploded. Anyway, we're getting into the next movie, 2000, the year 2000, in the year 2000. Actually, you know what? I should have had this as 2001, and 2001 should have been 2002. I was going off of IMDb's thing, which is a bit off. Fuck. But I don't want to readjust because that's too much of a pain in the ass. So I'll just say it's 2000, and that is Memento. Yeah. So this is what introduced me to Christopher Nolan. This was his second film. His first film was a minor, low-budget film called Following, which is okay, but no one's really heard of it. It's the one that put him on the map. And I'm a huge fan of Nolan, but not because of the Batman movies, because of this movie. I think the Batman movies are overrated and not that good. Sorry. The Dark Knight trilogy, I should say. And I feel like I kind of wish he never did that, because then he attracted all these stupid fanboys that just love him because of that. And every time I say I'm going to love Christopher Nolan, people's like, oh, you just like the Dark Knight. And I know, I don't like those films. I like it because of Memento and a couple other films you'll see on my list. I think this movie is a masterpiece. And, yeah, it's just the way that it fucks with linear time is some of the best, like the backward storytelling with intercut with sort of, two different storylines, one going backwards, one going forwards, intercut with it, and how it turns out to put you in the mindset of someone who has no short-term memory. It's fucking brilliant. It is brilliant. And you find out the protagonist, but spoilers, but you find out the protagonist of the film is actually the antagonist is actually a really fucked up guy at the end of it. It's so brilliant. Anyway, we'll get to 2001, which really should be 2002, but whatever. I let IMDb fuck up my dates. And that is because I saw this in 2002 in the theaters. But anyway, Donnie Darko. There was a lot of love for this film after it came out, like a year or two after it came out. It acquired this huge following, and then sometime around the 2010s, that following sort of backfired, and then it required a lot of haters and people saying that this movie's pretentious and not that good. And I don't know how that happened because I think this is a great movie. I stand by that is a great movie. I think the movie is good despite the director, because what the director's cut for this movie actually sucks, what he wanted to do with it. And I think it's a product of a lot of creative minds, producers, actors, people who put their love and thought to it. And I think this is really an example of a movie that goes beyond the director, because the director's actually not good and his career kind of failed after this. But the movie itself, I think, is a masterpiece. And now, this is another movie where it doesn't make complete sense on the first viewing, but, like, you know, on repeated viewing, you pick up things, and then there's, you know, bonus material online and stuff that kind of explains the story a bit more. But I think the way it's crafted, in fact, what I hated about the director's cut is that he attempted to outright tell you exactly what was going on, which I think ruins it. I think it's better to leave it ambiguous and kind of piece it together yourself personally. And the way that it deals with, you know, time travel and predestination, I think is brilliant. Anyway, and, you know, Jake Gyllenhaal, his big star. I know this is October Sky bullshit, but no, this is his big star. But anyway, so 2002. But really, that was 2002. But we'll get into 2002, which is The Mothman Prophecies. Yeah, I look back in this film and I do wonder if it's maybe not as good as I thought. Maybe it's a bit cheesy. But I remember this really, really... I had a good experience seeing this. You know, went to the Laurelhurst Theater in Portland and get beers. Actually, that's also where I saw Donnie Darko. Now that I mention it. But I have a particularly good memory. Like, every time I went to that theater, I ended up seeing a great movie. I think that streak sort of ended when I saw Star Trek the Motion Picture there. But for a while, it's like every movie we were seeing was like really good. And Mothman Prophecies does play extremely loose with based on the real story. It's not. It's totally fictional. But what they do with it, they do some really interesting concepts, like this guy who is, you know, driving from Washington, D.C. to Richmond. He finds himself on the Ohio-West Virginia border, and he has no fucking idea how he got there and how he managed to do such a long drive in such a short amount of time. And it builds and builds from there about all this weird shit happened, that you see that there's this, you know, weird force that they just identify as a Mothman or whatever, that's like driving people to a specific place so that he can, you know, save someone's life. Oh, it's so fucking good. I do like it. I do like this film. Anyway, 2003 has to be Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King. I could have done all three Lord of the Rings, but this time I was like, no, there's good movies those years. Let me do those first. And I'll get to Return of the King, which I think is the best Lord of the Rings movie, but there's an asterisk there because the extended version of this is the best Lord of the Rings movie. The theatrical version is severely lacking. So the Fellowship would be the best theatrical version, but if you include the extended version, it's Return of the King. And I think the issue with the Return of the King is that Peter Jackson, when he was editing The Two Towers, was thinking just about The Two Towers and not about the trilogy as a whole. So they originally planned on ending The Two Towers at a different place, but they decided, it was a better ending to end it much earlier. But by doing that, he fucked up Return of the King because he left way too much material for Return of the King, so it became a 3.5-hour movie, which is what the extended version is, and that's the only true form of it, because he actually should have ended Two Towers much later and started Return of the King later. That way it could have been a shorter movie. But, you know, I stand by this, even though I know some people disagree. I very firmly feel this way. But I still love Return of the King, especially the extended version, as I said. It's the classic, the prime example of a fantasy movie, and no fantasy movie even comes in anywhere near close to being as good as this. Yeah. So I love myself Return of the King. So, and also, god damn it, I gotta mention, I'm sick of people complaining about the multiple endings. All those endings need to fucking be there, except for maybe the last one with Sam. Okay, you could have cut that and left that for just the extended version. But shut the fuck up about there being too many endings in this film. Absolutely was not. If you think so, you're objectively wrong. Anyway, sorry. Next, 2004 is The Butterfly Effect. Yeah. I know I'll get a lot of disagreement on this. A lot of people. In fact, this movie has a terrible critic score. And it's. Yes, it is kind of pretentious, and this is another film where I think the director's cut sucks, and which sucks because it's hard to find the theatrical cut because I couldn't find the theatrical cut anywhere. I think I had to buy the Blu-ray. I never got a Blu-ray player, but anyway, because yeah, the director's cut has an ending that's pretentious. The theatrical ending was actually much better. But anyway, I actually like this, and some people complain that Ashton Kutcher ruins it because he doesn't fit this role. I don't have a problem with him, and I think that's because I've never seen him, never even heard of him before I saw this movie. So I didn't have these preconceived notions of him being this silly stoner dude from that 70s show. I never watched that show. So I actually thought he did a good job. I think people is just letting their outside influence of him find it hard to buy him in this role where I didn't have that. So I thought he was actually good in this role. And I liked how the way it explored like someone's past, a fucked up childhood, and in the fucked up way, and how he wants to go correct it, and he just makes things worse. It's an essential time travel movie in my opinion, and yeah, do like it. 2005, another controversial pick is going to be Star Wars Episode 3: Revenge of the Sith. I don't care. I know the love stories and the dialogue between Padme and Anakin is terrible. I know some Hayden Christensen's acting is terrible. Well, I don't care. I don't care. I love this movie. This movie we got to see how Darth Vader was created. And yes, the ending is really contrived where they purposely throw in things that try to make it match with fucking A New Hope, and it's really contrived. Like, oh, she lost the will to live, but I don't care. I think the epic showdown between Obi-Wan and Anakin is everything I always wanted. I always remember Kevin Smith's a review of this movie when it first came out, and talking about how as a kid he would read articles about this epic, showdown between in the 80s, around when Return of the Jedi was coming out, this epic showdown between Obi-Wan and Anakin Skywalker, and it's how he became Darth Vader, and now we finally get to see it and how amazing it was. I agree. I was really into this. Now, General Grievous thing was kind of a waste of time, but I don't care. I really like this movie. Anyway, 2006 is The Prestige. Getting back to Christopher Nolan, as I said, I love his films. And this is another amazing Chris Nolan film. And it's the one that proved to me that Memento was not a one-off. That he could absolutely do it again, and play with expectations, and throw subtle hints at things. And I've heard some people say, "Oh, I figured out the ending." Well, you probably could, because he did a good job of not trying to hide it too much and put all the hints in there. I personally didn't figure out the ending because I'm an idiot. So maybe I enjoyed it more, but when we got there, it was like, yeah, it's powerful. And yeah, I don't want to give anything away, but when I heard about two magicians having a feud, I'm like, well, that doesn't sound very interesting. But the way they tell the story and how they get into the characters and the dark side of them, and how they live a lie in order to perform their arts, it's powerful stuff. And David Bowie as Nikola Tesla in this, fucking brilliant. That's all I'll say. So next we'll get into 2007, and this is a movie I actually just watched 2 weeks ago, and that is Juno. Yeah, I watched this with my friends in New Zealand. I just randomly put it on when we were sitting around with nothing to do, and we watched it, and because they love that movie too. And watching it, I was like, This movie is a masterpiece. It really, really reaffirmed to me how much I love this movie. I fucking loved Elliot Page. You know, this movie obviously came out before he transitioned, but I still think he's an amazing actor and did an amazing job in this role. Um, and one of the reasons why I think this holds up, and some people might think, oh, it's just a silly comedy where they have young people do their stupid slang, like honest to blog and stuff like that. But what really makes this movie a masterpiece to me is the fact, and it's similar to Tarantino actually, that every side character feels like instantly fleshed out within seconds, and that each of these side characters, and it throws in all these random side characters too, and they all feel like they could be the star of their own movie, and that they're acting like they're the star of their own movie, which is a common thing in Tarantino that he's actually talked about. But I feel like that holds up just as much, if not even more so, in this film. In fact, I kind of feel like the only disappointing thing about this film is that is not more of it. The world is so rich and the characters are so interesting. I feel like this maybe should have been a show. And maybe if it came out in the year of streaming, perhaps it would have been. Because I feel like there's much more story there. And these characters are just so interesting. And God, I just love the wit in this film. I think it is a masterpiece. But next we'll get into 2008, which was one of those years I mentioned that was rough, that I almost did a 1981 and chose nothing. Because I was looking at all the films that came out in 2008. It's like none of these are actually that good. But I decided not to do the same thing twice, and so I did pick a movie, and that is Milk. It is a good movie. It maybe not one of my favorites. I wouldn't call it a masterpiece. But I do think this is probably one of the best LGBT movies ever made. I do think it's way better than Brokeback Mountain. So many people talk about Brokeback Mountain, how that should have won an Oscar. I don't think it should have. I didn't think that movie was all that good. I think this one should have won an Oscar. I think this one's a much better LGBT movie. Just my opinion. And Sean Penn gives the best performance of his life. It tells the real life story of in the I think late 80s or late 70s or early 80s of LGBT activists who actually got into local government and was assassinated, and just how trying and how hard their time was in San Francisco, and how fucked up it was that he just was murdered and the murderer got little consequences. It's a really dark ending, but God, what a powerful movie. So anyway, getting to 2009, which is District 9. I'm not saying Star Trek. 2009. You know I'm not going to say that. And Avatar is overrated. So, District 9. Very obvious analogy, is so obvious, but does it well. It's a sci-fi film with a very, very relevant commentary on the way we treat refugees, on racism, particularly refugees, and how they're little aliens that are refugees, and shows just how fucked up we would treat alien refugees based off of how fucked up we treat our actual refugees, human refugees. But when they get to the analogy where this character actually literally becomes one and starts to understand their plight, is really powerful stuff. 2010, of course, getting back to my Nolan love, is Inception. Now, this movie I don't think is quite as brilliant as Memento or The Prestige, but I still love it. I still think it's one of his best because it's the best sort of mind-bendy action film I've seen. And yeah, a lot of people were like, he's, maybe a bit confused on this. But I think it's absolutely brilliant. The different layers of the dream, even though that's not really how dreams actually work. It's more of a fictionalized version of dreams, but just the way they're able to mess with reality that I love. Wow, just had to do that. Anyway, 2011 is, I'm actually going to say Super 8, which I kind of don't like saying now because I've recently come to the realization that J.J. Abrams is a terrible director. I don't like what he did with Star Wars. I don't like what he did with Star Trek. And I just don't like anything he does. He wasn't the creator of Lost. That was Lindelof. He just was the producer. He filmed the first episode and turned it over to Lindelof. So I'm not even talking about Lost. Alias, I never got into that. And his other stuff, his Mission Impossible movie was mediocre. I think he's a bad director, and especially mainly based off of the Star Wars and Star Trek stuff, because he just does whatever the fans want. He's into fan service and doesn't have a voice of his own, in my opinion. But I like Super 8. Super 8, he was very obviously emulating Spielberg, but I don't think it's direct copy the way that Force Awakens was a direct copy of New Hope. I think he brings more of his original voice to it, even though, it does feel a lot like E.T., but it feels like an homage to E.T. and not a rip-off of O.T., and I do, E.T., sorry, and I do feel like the Force Awakens is a rip-off of New Hope and not an homage, personally. And I just think I feel some of that same emotional power that was in Lost, actually, that worked well in Lost. I feel that in this film, like the characters are really fleshed out. You care about them, you care about their backstory, and the intercut between this alien monster who's not actually E.T. because he goes around killing people, but it's like a weird mix between E.T. and a monster movie. It's a spin, so it's original, and I actually still love this movie. Sorry. 2012 is going to be Cloud Atlas. Underrated movie. I still think this movie is a masterpiece. People made fun of me because I put this in my top 5 favorite movies of all time. I don't care. I think this is criminally underrated. Yeah, the makeup in this movie is so terrible that parts of it was actually actively offensive and racist, but if you overlook that, the way it tells 6 different stories intercut, and I think this movie single-handedly has the best editing of all time ever of any movie. And I've heard reviews where like, oh, I like this one story, but I didn't like this other story. Oh, I like these 2 stories, but we could have gotten rid of those stories. Oh, maybe they shouldn't have even told all 6 that I would have liked the movie just about this story. You're missing the whole point of the fucking movie if you think they should. The whole point is all 6 stories are telling or have the same themes and repeating the same actions. Like, that's the whole point of that the people were living the same lives. And I've heard it's based off of books that's better, and I'm sure a lot of people think the book is better, and that's fair enough. I have never read it and actually never intend to. But part of what makes the movie work to me is the fact they have the same actors playing the same characters in different generations and different time zones, and the thought being they're being reincarnated, and that's what I love about it a lot. And I think the acting is absolutely amazing. Tom Hanks is who really fought for this movie to be made, and I really respect him for that. And I think this is a unique film and a lot of people are like, oh, it was a good effort, but it didn't come together. Get the fuck out of here. It did. It did come except for the bad makeup. But other than that, it totally did come together, and it brings me to tears every time I watch it. It's just a masterpiece. 2013 is another movie I struggled with coming up with a film, but I finally decided on 12 Years a Slave, which is the film that won the Oscar that year. It's not one of my favorite films of all time, but it is a strong film. It definitely deserved the Oscar. It's got amazing performances. It tells a very poignant, powerful story. So, yeah, that's my pick for 2013. 2014 is Interstellar. Again, getting back to Nolan. I think this is the last time I will, so don't worry. And a lot of this movie in particular, a lot of people hated or didn't like or think, oh, you're just a Nolan fanboy and that's the only reason. I hated people who said that. You're just a Nolan fanboy and that's the only reason you like it. No, I think the Dark Knight trilogy is not good. So I'm not a Nolan fanboy. Definitely not. I liked it because I think it's a strong science fiction film. Yeah, the ending could have been slightly better. I will admit that. It was a bit too on the nose. Maybe if they left it more ambiguous, it would be better. But there's some sequences in this film, like when they go to the planet that is all water, and they think there's mountains, but it's actually a giant wave coming to them. That's fucking brilliant. It's like one of the best. It is one of the best scenes in science fiction of all time. And the other scene where they're the ship that they have this smaller ship, like a shuttle or whatever, and they're trying to return to the main ship in order to continue the journey, but the ship is fucked up and spinning out of control, and they feel like there's no way to dock with it, and they get that amazing line where it says it's impossible. And Matthew McConaughey's character is like, no, it's necessary. Like, oh, it's so good. That's one, and just the music involved in it, it's a cinematic masterpiece. Those particular two scenes are cinematic masterpieces. Now the movie as a whole is still good. Yeah, it does drag on a bit too long on Earth at the start, but it is sort of about how people deny science, and that was really interesting that they live in a future where they deny the moon landing and thought it was fake. Oh God, but sort of made sense because their planet was dying and they were focused more on that, but the Salvation actually lied in the stars, and some people still believe that. And of course, a lot of people make fun of the whole, oh, love is a quantifiable scene. I actually like that. I don't care what anyone says. I do love this movie a lot. The Martian was not even that good. But anyway, sorry. I had to throw that in because the video I did once with Darren who didn't like Interstellar and love that. I love you, Darren, but The Martian's really not that good. Anyway, next, get into 2015. Another one of my favorite movies of all time, Room. Not to be confused with The Room, obviously. There's no Tommy Wiseau in this. But Room is why I love Brie Larson. And of course, this is before all that stupid controversial bullshit that happened later with Captain Marvel. But Brie Larson, I think, is one of the best actresses who ever made. Just going off of this one movie, by the way, because her performance in this movie is so good. And this movie, like, I was streaming tears several times, like when I watched this, like throughout the entire movie. It is about a really dark, fucked up situation, but it tells it through the eyes of a child who doesn't really know any better, and the sense of wonderment he gets after, because he lives his entire life inside one room, and the sense of wonderment he feels, you feel it with him, and the movie does such a good job and of telling the emotional story and the adult side of it, and how this trauma impacted the mother. It was God, it's just almost coming to tears just talking about it. It's such a good movie. It is, I do think, one of the best movies of all time, in my humble opinion. 2016. Oh, there was another movie I had listed as my favorite movie of 2016. I can't remember what it was, but I decided to change my mind and put Arrival instead, because I guess it's a sci-fi movie, and it is a very unique sci-fi movie. I love the ending. I thought the ending was absolutely brilliant, and I think it is a bit slow moving, but the way that they, slowly disseminate what exactly is going on through, a scientist, a linguistic trying to communicate with aliens, and all the issues that hold up with that. It's not something that most science fiction movies really tackle. You got Universal Translator and lets them instantly speak English. But here, this focuses on the language barrier, and my God, does it ever do a good job at it? I do really love this movie, and I think it's great. But I'm trying to figure out what the what the other movie I was going to go with in 2016. I can't figure it out. Hold on, I'm going to have to pause recording to figure this one out. Oh yeah, Captain Fantastic, of course. Yeah, I love this movie. I think it's an underrated indie movie. I think it's one of the funniest, best indie movie comedies. Maybe it relates to me more because I knew people who wanted, from a very liberal, left-leaning perspective, wanted to live outside of society, and this actually shows a family that does that, and them having to integrate with society, how they celebrate. They don't celebrate Christmas, they celebrate Noam Chomsky's birthday. And just how hilarious it is. I do think it's an underrated comedy film that was done really well. But in retrospect, I think I like Arrival better. I don't know. They're both great movies, So next we'll get into 2017, and full disclaimer here, I'm actually re-recording what I had originally recorded because I actually changed my mind for what my pick for 2017 is, because I had originally said War of the Planet of the Apes because that's what I had as my number one in my top 10 I did that year. But then I was wondering, after I recorded my video, I was editing, I was wondering, hey, what year did Thor Ragnarok come out? Because I actually love that movie. And sure enough, it came out 2017, and I actually like it better than War of the Planet of the Apes. So my pick for 2017 is Thor Ragnarok. I think at the time I was maybe a bit more down on the MCU, or maybe didn't realize how much I loved this movie until, a year or so after it came out. But yeah, this movie definitely is more influential to me. It's one that I think about and I personally like more. As much as I do like War of the Planet of the Apes, I've only seen it at one time. Where Thor Ragnarok is a movie I love to revisit. I enjoy every time. I think I like Taika Waititi as a director, and I haven't had one of his movies on my list yet. And I think this is definitely one of his more mainstream ones, obviously being a Marvel movie. But I think it is one of his best. And it's not just the humor, which I disagree with people saying that there was too much comedy and they never turned it down even when the scene should be serious. I disagree with that. We all have our opinions, and I think your opinions are wrong. That's what you have. But anyway, I think the comedy was always on point. I think the comedy always worked. I enjoyed the entire movie. Even the stuff with the Hulk I thought was very, very good. But more than that, I think this has the stylized action sequences with, set to the music of Led Zeppelin. I think is some of the best of the entire MCU. The best shit, like the cinematography and just the way it's shot, the way it's edited, is like some of the best, most stylized action sequences I've seen in any movie ever. So yeah, Thor Ragnarok is definitely my pick for 2017. Now, I will remind you, I am recording this after I had already recorded the rest of the video. So, and when I get to a couple years from now, I'm going to mention a Marvel movie. I'm going to say this is the first MCU movie on this list, which actually isn't true now, but it was true when I first recorded this video. But I'm editing it and adding this in because I think this deserves to be 2017 pick more than Planet of the Apes. So next we'll get into 2018. Now, when I did my top 10 for this year, I put Bandersnatch, Black Mirror, as my favorite movie of all time. But of that year, not of all time. But and I do love that. I listed that as one of my favorite episodes of television of all time. And it's technically a movie, but it's more of it's an interactive movie. And I was like, that's not what I want to pick. That's not really a movie. It is kind of, but I don't know. Instead, I decided to go with A Quiet Place, which is one of my favorite movies of all time. I think this, if you take away barring Aliens, if you take that out of the picture, this is my favorite horror movie of all time. Because to be fair, this is more of a horror than Aliens, even though true horror fans will say it's not a horror, it's more of a thriller. But I don't like what true horror fans would actually say is horror. I don't like those. So you gotta go to a thriller for me to like it. But I think this definitely has a lot of horror elements. And it's probably the most suspenseful movie going experience I had of all time. I had never been like so on the edge of my seat, more than any other movie in this. And I just think it's brilliant how it follows one family. It defies a lot of the normal horror tropes, which is probably why a lot of people wouldn't consider it a horror movie, and it's also why I love it. The second one I also liked, but that did have some of the horror tropes that kind of annoyed me, but this one didn't. It was just, God, brilliant. Just so intense, so intense. So next, I'll get into 2019, which finally I'm going to mention an MCU movie. I haven't done that yet. But I have to say Avengers Endgame, which is my favorite MCU movie. I think it's my favorite thing of anything Marvel ever. It's just so brilliant, the way that it brings in all the ongoing storylines, because there was a time when I went back and watched every MCU movie in order. And that made this movie even so much better because I got to see just how true it was to all these characters and how true it was to resolving some of these ongoing storylines throughout the entire MCU. The fact that they have this movie that has like a shitload of characters in it, and they're able to service them and like complete the storylines and have these emotional storylines is so impressive. And also the use of time travel, they use the other worlds theory, or type 3 time travel, if you will, is the best use of that I've seen. Some people were saying, "Oh, there's holes in it," but no, you're actually misunderstanding how it works. There's actually no holes, except for maybe the Captain America thing. But there's a thing the directors got into to explain that as well, which is kind of dubious. You got to use your head canon for that, but I'm fine with it. It's just, I love the time travel. I love the character stories. It's an emotional ride. They pay off all the Marvel characters throughout the years. It is a film event that is unique, that has nothing like it had ever really been done before, and I dare say never again. This is one of my favorite movies of all time, Avengers Endgame. So next, we get to 2020, the year of the pandemic. As I said, there wasn't that many movies this year, and there wasn't that many movies that I liked all that much. It was hard for me to come up with the movie, but I finally decided on Palm Springs, which is funny because when I first watched this movie, I didn't think much of it. I thought, oh, this is another Groundhog Day-esque, time loop story. And the more I read about Groundhog's Day, actually, I found out that this movie is closer to what the first draft of Groundhog's Day was, what it was originally intended to be, which I wonder if that's what they based it off of, because I can't remember exactly. I remember I looked up exactly how long the guy was stuck in the loop, and it was like 30 years or something. It was like repeating the same day over and over again. It's like twisted shit. But the more I saw it a couple more times and I thought about it more, I actually liked it a bit more, and I actually think it's quite brilliant. And it's not funny the way Groundhog's Day was funny, but it is funny in its own like twisted way, and it did do really interesting. I think the romance in this film is better than Groundhog's Day, I will say that. So 2021, again, hard to come up with a movie this year. I actually went with Judas and the Black Messiah. I wouldn't call this one of my favorite movies of all time, but this movie I actually did think was really powerful, the way and it it's dealt with the Black Panther movement in the 60s, and it really did it from an African American perspective, which I feel like a lot of these movies came out in the 80s and 90s try to, promote the cause of racial equality, but I feel like they don't really do it from an African American perspective, where I feel like this one really did, and I think it was really explored how fucked up, what's his face was the head of was it Hoover or whoever it was, the FBI dude. I know it wasn't. I can't remember his name, but anyway, how fucked up that era was, and how like racist the FBI were, and they were like, promoting white supremacy basically, and just getting into the particular character, like the main protagonist of the film is not the activist. Actually, it's the undercover agent who's working for the FBI, and just how fucked up his whole situation was, and how he was actually the Judas in this scenario, and that you really got to feel for him and see from his perspective. I thought was actually quite brilliant. So even though I wouldn't say this is one of my favorite movies of all time, I did think it was a really, really powerful one. Okay, so finally we are up to the most recent year as of me recording this video, and that the year that just finished for me, 2022. And as I said in my video I did for movies this year, my favorite movie of this year is Prey. The latest Predator movie is the best Predator. It's an awesome Predator movie after years and years, decades of getting nothing but shit Predator movies. We finally get a really good one, which I dare say might be my favorite Predator movie of all time. Because I love Predator 2 because it has the cheese, and I love the cheese, but this doesn't have the cheese, but it still manages to be an intense thriller, an intense, really suspenseful movie. Reminds me a lot of A Quiet Place, actually, which I do think I do like A Quiet Place a little bit better, but I still love this one because it really gets you into the character's mindset. And I love that the only characters in this film are Native American, are Comanche, and that there's barely any white characters in this, and they're kind of asshole trappers anyway, and it focuses mainly on that and their struggle against the predator, which is a unique concept, which I think, as I said, the character stories in this, particularly with the protagonist, her story and her overcoming, people not believing in her, and using her wits and to face down this impossible foe, was done extremely well. It was a well-earned ending, so I absolutely love this film. So, I am finally done. I know this is a super long video. I knew this would be. Should know it was coming into this. But I finally got through. Those are my favorite movies of every year I was born. And I mostly got through, at least name drops, my favorite movies of all time. So, yeah, now I've done it. I've gone through, picked every year apart to find my favorite movie, and this is the list I've come up with. I hope you enjoyed watching this and me rambling about my movies. I did enjoy recording this. Please leave a like, subscribe, all that kind of nonsense, and check out my channel as I cover many more stuff. Not much movie stuff, mainly focusing on shows, particularly Star Trek shows. Doing the original series at the moment, covering Picard Season 3 when that comes out, but all other crazy, wacky stuff coming on my channel. So, yeah, if you want to subscribe, that'd be great. And thanks a lot for watching.